I still remembered the exact way the sunlight slanted across the kitchen counter that morning, the harsh lines pooling at the edges of my old oak table, like a spotlight on all the tiny cracks and scuffs accumulated over a lifetime of family meals, arguments, and sullen silences. There was a slight chill in the air, despite it being late spring, that odd in-between season in which the house couldn't decide whether to be warm or cold, and so it felt perpetually uncomfortable. I had just set down my cup of tea when I noticed something off about the little locked jewelry box I kept on the sideboard. It was at an unusual angle, a few inches away from the dusty ring it had left behind from sitting in the same spot for years. My heart gave a small leap of warning, that subtle shift from mere curiosity to an uneasy dread. The entire morning had felt weighted, as though something was amiss beneath the surface, and now it stared me in the face, in the form of that misplaced box. I tried to dismiss the thought that anyone in this house would go rifling through my possessions, but denial was a flimsy shield against what I'd started to suspect over the last few days. Something about Erica, my daughter-in-law, had seemed contrived lately, a little too saccharine, her eyes too watchful whenever I came into the room. The tension between us was rarely open or direct. We carried it like carefully packed suitcases, only half acknowledging the extra baggage we lugged around. I was used to quiet friction in this household. My son, Paul, had chosen her, despite my many subtle warnings. And I'd tried to be supportive, truly. After all, he was a grown man, entitled to live his life as he pleased. But she had crept into our family with that cunning smile, those perfect manners that never quite warmed her eyes. And I knew, in a place deeper than intellect, that she had an agenda. The tension had grown over the past year, culminating in little signs I tried to brush away. Small amounts of money missing from my purse, a half-truth about a visit with an old friend that didn't align with a story she told Paul, the odd bits of mail she tried to intercept before I could read them. Yet I'd wanted so desperately to keep the peace. I was tired of confrontation, and so, like many older women in families fraught with conflict, I stayed quiet, thinking that maybe one day I'd be proven wrong. Now I stared at that box, heart pounding with the certainty that something precious was gone. I lifted its lid gingerly, as though it might bite me back for having been so careless in my trust. Sure enough, the bracelet my grandmother had given me on my wedding day, the one I wore for every family photograph, was missing. My ring that I'd put aside for safekeeping while the prongs were loose, also gone. An emptiness in the soft velvet interior told me I'd been right all along about Erica's suspicious glances. My hands started shaking. I can't say exactly which emotion took precedence. Anger at being betrayed in my own home, heartbreak that my son had brought this woman into our lives, or a surge of furious regret for not confronting all those small red flags earlier. A single tear slipped down my cheek, but I brushed it away and decided that if I was going to look for evidence, I'd do it quietly, thoroughly, and without an immediate confrontation. I was done being meek, done trying not to rock the boat. I just needed undeniable proof, so that when I brought it to Paul or to the police if necessary, there'd be no chance of twisting the truth. In the hush of that morning, when both Paul and Erica were supposed to be out, he at work, she claiming to go to some volunteer meeting, I felt a strange sense of autonomy. This was still my home. I'd lived here for 30 years, raising my children within these walls, caring for my late mother in her final days, and hosting countless holiday dinners. Even though I'd let them move in to try to help them save up for a place of their own, I had always paid the bills, made the tough decisions, been the rock that everyone leaned on. Now I drew upon that deeply ingrained sense of responsibility, that well of calm that mothers often cultivate in times of crisis, and decided to search the place for further signs of wrongdoing. It was surreal, rummaging through my own house in search of stolen belongings. I felt like a trespasser in my own domain, tiptoeing so the neighbors or the mailman wouldn't hear me. My knees creaked as I crouched down to check the bottom cabinets in the living room, the built-in ones where old photo albums and board games lived. There was nothing out of place there, though I came across an old album of Paul's baby pictures that made me pause and press a hand to my chest. The sweet innocence in his eyes. The little hand that used to clutch my finger so tightly. Memories of a time when our bond was unbreakable. I'd done my best to instill in him a sense of empathy, honesty, and loyalty, but I'd never considered that I'd have to protect him from the choices he'd make as an adult. Guilt gnawed at me. Maybe I hadn't guided him enough. Maybe I'd been too lenient or too controlling at times. The swirl of regret threatened to overwhelm me, but I pushed it aside. I had a mission to complete. For half an hour, I turned the living room upside down, rummaging behind the big couch, feeling the prickle of spider webs in corners I hadn't dusted in months. I found nothing. Then I moved on to the dining area, scanning the tall glass cabinet that showcased my porcelain figurines and the cutlery set I'd inherited from my grandmother. Everything looked intact, meticulously arranged, the little figurine of the dancing lady still perfectly centered. In that moment, I marveled at how out of place serenity seemed in a life that felt so chaotic. Clutching a dish rag in my fist, I proceeded to the hallway, my steps echoing in the hush. The air smelled faintly of the lavender floor cleaner I'd used the day before, and something about that familiar domestic scent, combined with the growing dread in my chest, struck me as profoundly sad. This was my safe haven, the place I'd come to rest after heartbreak, after the loss of my mother, after arguments that left me drained. I was scouring it like a detective. I should have been scrubbing away illusions instead of dust. When I reached Erica and Paul's room, a trembling hesitation gripped me. Did I really want to cross that line? I could almost hear Erica's voice, sweetly venomous, in my head. "Mother, why are you in our room?" She liked to use mother sometimes in this strangely formal, passive-aggressive tone, as though reminding me I was just the mother of her husband, not quite on equal footing. But I had to know the truth. It was not out of some morbid curiosity, but an urgent sense of needing to protect myself and my family's legacy. She might twist my actions into an invasion of privacy, but I'd already found enough reason to suspect her. Stealing from me was a direct violation. I crossed the threshold, ignoring the pounding of my heart. Their room was surprisingly tidy for a couple that always seemed so pressed for time. The bed was made, the duvet smoothed out, no stray clothes on the floor. Everything had its place, from the neat row of shoes near the closet to the carefully arranged cosmetics on Erica's vanity. At first glance, there was no sign of anything amiss. Nonetheless, I gently lifted the corner of the duvet, looking for lumps or hidden compartments. Nothing. I inched my way to the closet, sliding the door open with caution, half expecting something incriminating to fall out. Instead, I found Paul's suits hung in careful order, navy, charcoal, then black. Erica's dresses, color-coordinated, from light pastels to deep reds, swayed a little as I rummaged through them. My breath caught when I spotted the glimmer of a small satin purse among her shoes at the bottom. I knelt down, feeling a twinge in my hips, but adrenaline kept me moving. I picked up the purse, weighing it in my hands. It felt too heavy, as though it contained more than the typical lipstick and compact. My pulse thrummed in my ears. If someone had told me last week that I'd be on my knees rummaging through my daughter-in-law's personal belongings, I'd have scoffed. I'd spent most of my adult life trying to be the kind of mother-in-law who respects boundaries. But boundaries had been broken by her first. With trembling fingers, I slid the clasp open. Immediately, I recognized the piece of silver glinting at the top, my ring. The one with the small ruby I'd gotten from my grandmother that I'd set aside to have repaired. It had been missing for nearly a month now, and I'd thought maybe I'd misplaced it. My mind had looped through excuses because I so badly wanted to believe no one under my roof would steal from me. Yet here it was, lying atop a tangled mess of other trinkets, including the bracelet and a pair of earrings I'd lost track of last summer. A wave of nausea washed over me. I clutched the purse and stared at the stolen items, struggling to absorb the sheer audacity of what she'd done. The anger I felt was immediate and scorching, but layered beneath that anger was a deeper heartbreak. This woman, who had promised to love my son, was also stealing from his mother. And not just petty cash. These were heirlooms, pieces of my family's history that she'd brazenly shoved into her bag. My hands trembled as I set the purse down, carefully placing it back at the bottom of the closet. I still wasn't sure how I could confront her, but I knew there was no going back now. The illusions were shattered. I forced myself to think rationally, to consider what I'd do next. Perhaps I'd take photos of the stolen items as evidence. Maybe I'd go directly to Paul. But a voice in the back of my mind reminded me how Paul often defended her, how she had a way of twisting narratives so adeptly that I'd end up looking like the paranoid one. I needed more than just items in her purse. I needed a plan. A part of me felt guilty for not wanting to discuss this with my son immediately, but I'd seen how easily she manipulated him. I'd mention the missing jewelry and he'd get anxious, wanting to believe there was a misunderstanding or that I'd misplaced it. She'd stand there looking offended, and I'd have no real recourse except my intuition, which he seemed to trust less and less. So I told myself I'd gather more concrete proof, something undeniable. Then I'd decide how to act. My logical mind told me to confront them both at once, but my heart warned me that I'd be blindsided by more lies if I didn't have every angle covered. Stepping away from the closet, I closed the door with shaking fingers and moved to Erica's vanity. The top was pristine, but I pulled open drawers carefully, checking for any sign of hidden containers or stashes. Everything seemed ordinary enough: cosmetics, hair ties, a small journal with a floral cover. For a moment, I considered flipping through that journal, but decided it was too personal. Besides, I'd found what I was looking for. There was no need to sink further into unethical snooping. My mission now was to keep quiet, to catch her in the act, or at least make sure she couldn't deny the crime. I replaced everything exactly as I found it, forced my breathing to steady, and made my way out of the room. My head swirled with anger, betrayal, and a strange clarity. I was no longer the naive mother trying to keep the peace. Something had snapped inside me, releasing all the pent-up frustration of the past year. I felt older but not weaker, maybe even stronger in a grim sort of way. And as I walked down the hall, I realized I wasn't just planning on confronting her. No, I wanted her out of my life, out of my home, and away from my son before she destroyed any more of our family's dignity. While the kettle boiled for my second cup of tea, I found myself whispering to the silence, "You won't win this time, Erica. I won't let you." It was a vow, soft but resolute, echoing through the kitchen as if the walls themselves were bearing witness. The rest of the day passed in a haze of measured calm. I rehearsed in my mind how I'd talk to Paul, how I'd show him the evidence, but a persistent worry gnawed at me. He might defend her, or worse, she might twist the story so effectively that I'd find myself alienated from my own son. My boy, the one I'd cradled in my arms, taught to ride a bike, watched the countless soccer practices. Was I about to lose him to this woman's manipulations? The thought nearly broke my resolve. That night, when Erica and Paul returned, I feigned a headache and stayed in my room. I told them I'd skip dinner. Erica offered to bring soup, her tone dripping with concern that felt like poison disguised as honey. I declined with a forced smile, claiming I just needed rest. In truth, I didn't trust myself to keep a calm facade at the dinner table. I could barely look at her without my stomach turning. I spent the evening lying in bed, eyes on the ceiling, the lamp casting a warm glow that felt at odds with my internal turmoil. The next few days went similarly. I pretended not to notice anything amiss, while observing Erica's every move. She acted as though nothing had changed, though I caught her glancing at me oddly, likely assessing if I suspected anything. She continued her polite small talk, complimenting my cooking, offering to help with groceries. The false camaraderie between us grew more suffocating with each passing minute. Whenever Paul was around, she'd lean on him, wrapping her arms around his waist as if staking her claim, as though she sensed the shift in my attitude and wanted to bolster her position. I played along, outwardly placid, but inside I felt like a pot about to boil over. My anger fueled a desire for justice, but also for a kind of karmic reckoning. I kept thinking of the jewelry, how each piece was tied to a memory of the women in my family who came before me. Women who worked hard, sacrificed so much, and passed down those tokens of love to me. How dare Erica help herself to something so deeply meaningful? It wasn't simply about monetary value. It was about the story and legacy that each piece carried, stories she cared nothing about, evidently. The one afternoon, as I folded laundry in the spare room, I heard her on a phone call. The door to the bedroom she shared with Paul was ajar. Her voice, usually so cheerful around others, was now cold and clipped. I couldn't make out every word, but certain phrases floated into the hallway. Just a bit more time. I can get the funds. She doesn't even know. Yes, the safe is downstairs. Valuable documents, too. My heart pounded in my ears. Funds? Documents? My safe in the study contained not only some of my most important papers, like the deed to the house, life insurance policies, and some bonds, but also a modest sum of emergency cash. Could she be planning to rob me further? The laundry basket rattled in my trembling arms. I stood there, heart hammering, straining to catch the rest of her conversation, but she walked further into the bedroom, and her voice became muffled. I carefully crept closer to the door, but one of the floorboards squeaked under my foot. Instantly, she fell silent. The door swung open, revealing her there, phone in hand, eyes narrowed at me. "Oh," she said with an almost comical attempt at nonchalance. "I was just calling about that charity auction I'm volunteering for. Didn't realize you'd be right outside. Everything okay?" My pulse still raced, but I forced a benign smile. "Yes, dear. I was just folding some laundry and heard you speaking. I thought you might need something." She studied me, her lips slightly parted as though about to question me further, then shook her head. "I'm good," she said, her tone icy under the polite veneer. "Thank you." I nodded and shuffled away, feeling her stare drilling into my back. Once in the safety of my room, I set the basket down and pressed a hand to my chest. My mind reeled with questions. Was she in debt? Was she planning a heist of some sort? The notion felt dramatic, but given what I'd found, it didn't seem impossible. My safe was no small matter. While the emergency cash wasn't a fortune, it was enough to warrant serious concern. And those documents, if lost or tampered with, could cause immense complications. In the days that followed, I became more vigilant. I placed a small piece of tape on the edge of the safe's door so I'd know if anyone tried to open it without my knowledge. Each morning, I'd check if the tape was still intact. It remained unbroken for a while, but I had a gnawing feeling that Erica was merely biding her time. Meanwhile, Paul seemed exhausted, constantly coming home late from work, complaining of stress. It was hard to get him alone without Erica's presence. She had a talent for inserting herself into every conversation. Once or twice, I dropped hints. I mentioned the significance of family heirlooms and how tragic it would be if anything ever happened to them. Paul looked at me with a puzzled expression, while Erica smiled sweetly, nodding in agreement. It was maddening. Finally, a week after I discovered my jewelry in her purse, the situation escalated. I had gone to bed early, feigning sleep. Around midnight, I got up to grab a glass of water and saw a faint light under the door of the study. My heart lurched. The safe. Could Erica be in there right now? Moving as quietly as possible, I slipped down the hall and peered through the partially open door. There she was, crouched in front of the safe, her phone flashlight illuminating the lock. I had never believed her to be an expert in safe cracking, but apparently she was trying. Her hair was pulled back, her face twisted in concentration. My mind raced with a dozen ways to handle this. Call the police? Shout at her? Get Paul? But if I involved Paul without proof of her wrongdoing, she'd twist it once again. This time, however, I had something better. I had her in the act. My phone was tucked in my robe's pocket. Quietly, I turned on the camera and recorded a short video of her fiddling with the safe. The rush of adrenaline nearly made me drop the phone, but I steadied myself, capturing about 30 seconds of footage before stepping back. My heart hammered so loudly, I was sure she'd hear it. Yet she remained aware of my presence, too focused on deciphering the combination. I slipped back into my bedroom, breathless, pulse thrumming in my ears. I knew this was the final straw. In the morning, I'd confront her, and I'd have tangible proof. I tossed and turned for hours, replaying the scenario in my head, imagining her reaction, the lies she might spin. Would she claim she was just checking on something, or that she had my permission? I couldn't decide the best approach, direct confrontation in front of Paul, or privately so I could gauge her reaction without him intervening. I didn't want to blindside Paul entirely, but I also needed a moment alone with her to see if she'd confess. By the time the sun rose, I had a plan. I'd wait until Paul left for work, then confront Erica with the video. If she tried to deny anything, I'd call the police or threaten to. I was done playing nice. Morning felt surreal. Erica was all bright smiles, humming a tune while making coffee, as though she hadn't spent half the night kneeling at my safe. I watched her, anger simmering just beneath my calm facade. Paul hurried through breakfast, only half listening to her chatter about some fictitious charity event, before grabbing his keys and heading out the door. As soon as I heard his car pull away, I marched into the living room, where Erica was scrolling on her phone. She looked up, her face a picture of polite inquiry. "Is everything all right?" she asked, voice saturated with faux concern. My chest tightened. "We need to talk." I didn't raise my voice. I kept it low and steady, but every syllable vibrated with the weight of my fury. She cocked her head. "Sure, about what?" I exhaled, trying to maintain composure. "About what you were doing last night at my safe." Her face twitched almost imperceptibly, but she recovered quickly. "Safe? I don't know what you're talking about." My jaw clenched. "Really?" "Because I have a video on my phone that shows otherwise." Color drained from her cheeks. For a second, she opened her mouth, then closed it, as though searching for a plausible lie. Finally, she laughed, a short, shaky sound. "I can explain. I was worried you might have changed the combination for some reason. And since Paul said we'd need to access some important paperwork soon, I cut her off. That is enough. Don't insult my intelligence by lying. I know about the jewelry too." Her eyes narrowed. "What jewelry?" "My grandmother's bracelet, my ring, the other items in your purse." She stood abruptly, shoulders tense. "You have no right to go through my personal things." The irony of her accusation nearly made me laugh out loud. "Oh, but you have the right to steal from me and rummage through my safe in the middle of the night?" She started to speak, but I held up my hand. "Spare me the excuses. I don't want to hear them. I want you out of my house." Her lips trembled, and for a split second, I thought I saw real fear in her eyes. She glanced at the front door, as if considering a quick escape, then glared at me. "You can't just throw me out. Paul and I live here, he pays rent. He pays a small contribution for groceries and utilities. I own this house, and I can absolutely throw you out if you continue to steal from me." She stared me down, cheeks flushed. Then her expression shifted to something cunning. "Paul will never believe you. He loves me, and you'll look like some paranoid old woman. If you think you're going to get rid of me that easily, you're mistaken." Her words were like poison, but I held my ground. I have the video of you trying to break into my safe. I also have pictures of my jewelry in your purse. Unless you want me to share them with the police, you will pack your things and leave. I'll give you until this evening. If you're not gone by the time Paul gets home, I'll show him the evidence myself, and he can decide who he wants to believe. Her eyes widened, and the venom in her gaze could have melted steel. She pressed her lips together. You're making a mistake, she hissed. That might be, I replied softly, but it's my decision to make. For a moment, I thought she might lunge at me or start screaming, but instead she stood there, trembling, and let out a scoff. Fine, she said, her voice dripping with hatred. Don't think this is the end of it. Paul will hear my side and we'll see what he does. She stormed off, presumably to start packing, and I sank into the nearest chair. My legs felt like jelly, and my heart was thudding a wild rhythm against my ribcage. I'd done it. I'd taken a stand. Even so, a wave of profound sadness swept over me. I wasn't just casting out a stranger. I was unraveling a piece of my family. No matter how toxic she was, losing her would have repercussions. Paul might resent me, might grow distant, or even cut me off. The thought broke my heart, but I couldn't let her leech off me any longer or defile the memory of the women in my family by stealing their jewelry. Sometimes survival means severing a limb to save the body, and in that moment, Erica was the poisoned limb. I clutched my phone, the video evidence that could protect me or destroy my relationship with my son, and I reminded myself that I was doing what had to be done. Around midday, I heard rummaging, the slamming of drawers, and the rustle of suitcases. I stayed in my bedroom, door closed, not wanting another confrontation. My spine was tense with the knowledge that she might barge in at any moment, hurling accusations or curses. But she never did. And the noises finally stopped. I tiptoed to the living room. Her suitcases were by the front door, but she was nowhere in sight. I lingered there for a long while, uncertain how I felt, triumphant, fearful, or just numb. Eventually, she reemerged, hair disheveled, eyes puffy. I'll wait for Paul outside, she muttered, then stepped onto the porch, slamming the door behind her. My breath emerged in a shudder. So this was it, the final stand. I expected them both to return later, but as the afternoon stretched on, I stayed alert. Paul usually got home around 6, but by 7 there was no sign of him or Erica. I paced the house, phone in hand. Had she convinced him to stay elsewhere? Was she spinning some story about me being mentally unstable or paranoid? My imagination ran wild with scenarios in which Paul sided with her. Then, at about 7:30, the front door opened. I braced myself, stepping into the hallway. Paul walked in alone, shoulders slumped, face ashen. He looked at me with red-rimmed eyes, the expression of a man who'd been blindsided by a tidal wave. Mom. My stomach lurched. Everything? I repeated softly. He nodded, gaze dropping to the floor. She said you accused her of stealing, that you threatened to throw her out, and she left. I've been trying to reach her, but she won't pick up the phone. She just sent me a text saying she was going to a friend's place. I swallowed hard, feeling a surge of empathy from my son. This was not how I wanted it to happen. But it was out in the open now, so I met his eyes and said, I'm sorry you had to find out this way. But what I told her was true. She stole from me. For a moment, he looked like he might protest or doubt me. My chest constricted painfully. Then I held out my phone, showing him the video. His eyes widened as he recognized Erica, crouched in the study, trying to break into my safe. He watched in stunned silence, and I explained in detail how I had found my jewelry in her purse. He didn't interrupt, just stood there, eyes brimming with tears. When I finished, he let out a shaky exhale. Why, why would she do this? It doesn't make any sense. I reached out, setting a hand on his arm. I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe she has debts, or maybe my voice broke. I just don't know. He sagged, shoulders collapsing as if the weight of betrayal was too heavy to bear. She told me you were trying to push her out because you never liked her. But this. He gestured at the phone, tears slipping down his cheeks. I can't ignore what I'm seeing. I just feel so stupid, Mom. I pulled him into a hug, feeling his body shudder with suppressed sobs. You're not stupid. You loved her and you trusted her. That's not stupidity. That's empathy. It's her fault for abusing that trust. In that silent embrace, I felt the years roll back, remembering the young boy who used to cling to me after waking from a nightmare. But now the nightmare was real. We stood there for a long while, until he pulled away and wiped his eyes. I need to talk to her, try to understand, but for now, I guess I'll respect your decision. If you want her gone, then she's gone. Relief mingled with sorrow in my chest. I nodded. Thank you, Paul. I know this is painful, but I can't have her in my house anymore. He just nodded, gazed distant, and headed to his room. I could hear him crying through the door later, and it broke my heart all over again. I retreated to my own room, tears stinging my eyes, but also a strange sense of triumph filling my chest. The illusions had fallen away. I had stood up for myself. Yet it felt far from over. Days passed, and Erica didn't return. Paul moped around, going through the motions of work, barely speaking at dinner. Each night I could hear him on the phone, leaving voicemails or sending texts that went unanswered. On one hand, it gave me peace not to have her under my roof. On the other, the sight of my son in despair was excruciating. My heart warred with itself. Was there a chance for reconciliation if she apologized, if she returned what she'd taken and explained herself? But every time I thought of her rummaging through my safe or the cold look in her eyes as she lied, I couldn't envision trusting her again. Then, one afternoon, as I was sitting in the living room reading, Paul came in, looking haggard but resolute. Erica wants to come by and pick up some more of her things, he said. She asked if you'd be willing to leave them on the porch. My pulse quickened. When? Tonight. She said she'll text me before she arrives. He paused, scanning my face. Are you okay with that? I thought about the confrontation, about the tension and possibility of more lies. Finally, I nodded. I can put them in a box, sure, but I'm not going to speak with her. I don't have anything left to say. I understand, he replied softly. That evening, I carefully gathered the rest of her items from the guest bathroom, the linen closet, and any stray belongings from around the house. I placed them in a cardboard box, setting it by the front door. As I carried it outside, the dusk was settling in, painting the sky in muted shades of orange and purple. A gust of wind blew through the yard, rustling the leaves. For a moment, I felt a pang of nostalgia for the life I'd had before Erica entered the picture. Even though she'd been around for only a couple of years, it felt like a lifetime of drama compressed into that period. I placed the box on the porch, resisting the urge to rummage through it, to ensure nothing of mine was hidden inside. I trusted I'd been thorough. Then I went back inside and locked the door. Paul paced in the living room, occasionally glancing out the window. We waited in taut silence, the air thick with the weight of undone conversations. When headlights finally flashed across the window, my breath caught. Paul turned to me. I'll handle it, he said, swallowing hard. I nodded and stayed in the kitchen, peering from behind the curtain. Erica stepped out of a car I didn't recognize, likely an Uber or a friend's vehicle. She looked tense, scanning the darkened house. Paul opened the door but stayed in the doorway. They exchanged a few words I couldn't hear. She gestured toward him, face twisted in an expression that might have been anger or desperation. He shook his head, pointing to the box, and she scoffed. Then she stooped to pick it up, rummaged through it, and slammed the top shut. Before turning to leave, she said something to him. I caught the edges of her voice, but not the exact words. Paul just shook his head again, arms folded. Without another glance, she hauled the box to the waiting car. My stomach churned as the car pulled away. That simple departure felt so anticlimactic for a moment that I wondered if there'd be a final confrontation. But none came. The car disappeared into the twilight, leaving a hush over the front yard. Paul closed the door and stood there, eyes glassy with unshed tears. I came over and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. He leaned into me, and I let him rest his head against mine. No words passing between us. That night, I should have slept easier, but I tossed and turned. Something about Erica's abrupt compliance unnerved me. She'd left with her things, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the last I'd hear from her. Over the next week, Paul and I tiptoed around each other's grief. We rarely discussed Erica, aside from the necessary logistical details like whether she'd come for anything else, or if she'd signed any paperwork to remove her name from certain shared accounts. Paul was a ghost of himself. He went to work, returned home, sometimes had a drink, and stared off into space. I ached for him, but I also respected his need to process. Meanwhile, I tried to restore some sense of normalcy to the house. I cleaned rooms she'd frequented, as if scrubbing away her presence. I aired out the guest room, changed the linens, rearranged the furniture. It was cathartic, a way to reclaim my territory. Then, about 2 weeks after her departure, a letter arrived in the mail. The envelope looked official, from a law firm. My heart rate accelerated as I opened it. Inside was a curt notice from an attorney representing Erica, demanding that I allow her access to retrieve some marital assets she claimed were in the house, including jewelry, certain household items, and to my shock, a portion of the contents of my safe. The letter implied I was withholding property that belonged to the couple. Reading it felt like a punch to the gut. She was trying to twist the narrative, to claim that my possessions were rightfully hers or Paul's. I stared at the words, fury coiling in my chest like a hot, living thing. When Paul came home, I showed him the letter. He looked mortified. "This is crazy," he murmured. "Those items are yours, Mom, not ours." "She has no claim." "I know," I snapped, "but she's dragging lawyers into this. If she tries to say those heirlooms were gifts or that the safe contained marital property, it could become a legal battle." My voice quivered with a mixture of anger and fear. Paul sighed, dropping onto the couch. "I'll talk to her. I'll tell her to back off. She's obviously lying, and I won't let her use me to do this to you." I believed his sincerity, but I knew Erica well enough by now. She was cunning, and she thrived on manipulating the system to her advantage. So I decided to take my own precautions. I found a lawyer. I documented everything, from the jewelry's provenance to the video footage of her trying to open the safe. My lawyer assured me that I had a strong case, but the stress was overwhelming. The mere thought of going to court, having to see Erica's smug face across a table, or hearing her spin lies under oath made me physically ill. Night after night, I lay awake, haunted by the sense that I was locked in a battle with a person who had no qualms about destroying my peace for her own gain. And I realized that my only real leverage, aside from the legal route, was still in that house. The safe. She wanted something in there badly enough to risk being caught. She thought she could claim it was marital property. Perhaps she believed I was hiding money that belonged to Paul. Maybe she'd told him she'd stored something valuable in there, The possibilities made my head spin. It dawned on me that if the safe was what she was after, I could remove that target altogether. I'd never intended to move out of my own home, but maybe I could relocate the safe. Or better yet, take it entirely, stash it in a bank or at a friend's place until the dust settled. That might protect me from further intrusion. At first, the idea felt extreme. This was my family home, the place where I was supposed to retire and spend my golden years. But I also knew that Erica's manipulations could escalate. If she somehow convinced a judge to force me to open the safe for an inventory, who knew what she might plant or claim inside it? Paranoid as it sounded, I wouldn't put anything past her. So one evening, after Paul had gone to bed, I wandered into the study, turning on the small desk lamp. The safe stood in the corner, unassuming, yet suddenly it loomed large in my psyche. This was the anchor of the drama, the object of Erica's desire. I ran my hands over the cool metal, remembering the day I'd had it installed years ago after my mother passed. It wasn't just about storing valuables, it was about protecting our family's past, present, and future. And now, ironically, it had become a source of danger. The next morning, I called a local company that handled moving and storage. I arranged for them to come discreetly, under the guise of furniture removal. I told Paul I decided to renovate the study, to get rid of some old stuff, including the safe. He looked at me quizzically, but he didn't argue. I think part of him was relieved I was taking proactive steps to secure what mattered to me. Maybe he even agreed it was a good idea to remove the biggest trigger for Erica's nonsense. A few days later, two men arrived with a small dolly and the tools needed to unbolt a safe from the floor. I hovered by the study door, anxiety gnawing at me. It felt symbolic to unroot the safe from the house's foundation, as though I was pulling up the last vestige of stability. But I reminded myself that it was necessary. Once they loaded it into their truck, I locked the house behind me and followed them to the storage facility, where I had rented a secure unit. It wasn't cheap, but it felt safer than keeping it in the house, waiting for Erica's next move. Standing in the dimly lit corridor of the storage facility, I watched them maneuver the safe into the unit, hearing the screech of metal on concrete. My chest tightened. Memories rushed through me. Birthday parties, Sunday dinners, all the good times that had once filled my life within that home. Now I was here, hiding my precious safe because a manipulative daughter-in-law had turned my house into a battlefield. When it was finally settled and the men closed the unit door, I felt an odd mixture of grief and relief. I locked the unit with a heavy padlock, storing the new combination in my phone's password manager. Then I left, my footsteps echoing in the hallway, trying not to look back. After returning home, I walked through the study, noticing the stark emptiness of the corner where the safe once stood. Dust outlines marked its former presence, a ghostly reminder of everything that had changed. I realized then that this house would never feel quite the same. Erica had stolen not just jewelry, but also the sense of sanctuary I once felt here. That evening, I prepared a simple dinner, pasta with homemade sauce. Paul arrived late, as usual, looking more somber than ever. He muttered something about working overtime to take his mind off the separation, then sank into his chair at the table. As we ate, I mustered the courage to ask, "Have you heard from Erica's lawyer again?" He shook his head. "No. She's gone quiet. Maybe she realized she doesn't have a case." A bitter laugh escaped me. "She might be regrouping." "Don't let your guard down, Paul." He sighed, setting down his fork. "Mom, I'm sorry you're going through this. I feel like it's my fault for bringing her into our lives." I reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "You fell in love, Paul. That's no sin. You didn't know she was like this." He drew a shaky breath, and I could see tears welling. "I just want you to know that even though it hurts, I understand why you did what you did. After seeing that video, I can't pretend everything's fine. It's just hard to let go of the woman I thought she was." My own eyes glistened. "I'm sorry," I whispered, wishing I could spare him that pain. He nodded, swallowing thickly. Anyway, I'll keep an eye on her lawyer situation. I told her I won't cooperate with any false claims. But she might dig in. She's not the type to back down easily. The mention of false claims made me shiver. Erica was no longer just a thorn in my side. She was a genuine threat to my peace, my belongings, perhaps even my reputation. But I reminded myself that I was stronger than she realized. I had the house, the evidence, and now I had removed the safe from her reach. If she wanted to fight, she'd have to do it on my terms. In the stillness that followed, Paul and I picked at our food, the only sounds coming from the ticking of the kitchen clock and the distant hum of the refrigerator. Each tick felt like a countdown to another confrontation. A week passed with no further word from Erica. The tension in the house eased a bit, though it never fully disappeared. I busied myself, cleaning out closets, tidying the basement, and donating old items, as if I could also declutter the emotional mess in my life by sorting through physical objects. Paul was at work most of the time, and in the evenings, he avoided the subject of Erica. Occasionally, he mentioned therapy or counseling, saying he thought it might help him process the betrayal. I encouraged it, knowing that even though he understood the facts, the emotional scars were deep. Then, on a crisp Saturday morning, just when I was beginning to hope Erica had truly disappeared, a process server showed up at my door. The official papers he handed me were a summons related to Erica's legal claim for equitable distribution of marital property, naming the jewelry, unspecified valuables, and even a portion of my home's equity. My hand shook as I signed for the documents. It felt unreal, like a scene from a dreadful soap opera. But here it was, spelled out in black and white legalese. I was being sued for items that had belonged to me long before Erica ever came into our lives. My lawyer assured me we would fight it. She explained that Erica was stretching the definition of marital property to an absurd degree, but she warned that legal battles can be messy and expensive. Erica's tactic, it seemed, was to harass me into settling or giving up some assets. The new reality weighed on me. I spent hours in my bedroom combing through old receipts, photos that showed me wearing the jewelry before Paul even met Erica, and letters from relatives verifying which pieces were inherited. I had to build a case, piece by piece, day by day, determined not to let her win. Yet the emotional toll was immense. Some nights, I cried myself to sleep, overwhelmed by the cruelty of it all. She had disrupted my life in a way that felt almost personal, as if her goal wasn't just to steal valuables, but to break my spirit. However, in the midst of that despair, a stubborn resilience grew. Each time I felt the tears threatening to swallow me, I'd recall how she'd looked that night in the study, creeping around like a thief, and I'd remember that I was in the right. My anger fueled my courage. Slowly, I began to see that I wasn't merely a victim of her schemes. I was a woman who had dedicated her life to family, who had a right to stand her ground, who had the moral high ground on her side. And I would not cower in the face of her legal intimidation. As the weeks turned into months, the legal battle turned onward. My lawyer filed a response, providing proof that the jewelry was mine outright. We requested that all claims be dismissed. Erica's lawyer countered with allegations that the jewelry had been gifted to Erica, that there was evidence I'd personally handed her certain items. We knew it was false, but we had to disprove it in court, which meant depositions, hearings, and a labyrinth of paperwork. Paul, for his part, was called to give a statement. He testified that the jewelry predated Erica's arrival in our family, that it was never given as a gift. He tried to speak neutrally, but it was clear he was furious at Erica's lies. The heartbreak was etched across his face whenever he had to recount the dissolution of his marriage. Erica showed up to those proceedings with a smug look, hair perfectly styled, wearing clothes that screamed confidence. She avoided eye contact with me, except for brief moments where her gaze seared through me like a challenge, as if daring me to crumble. But I refused to show fear. My lawyer would sometimes touch my hand gently when I got upset, reminding me to stay calm, that truth was on my side. I clung to that certainty like a life raft. Outside the courthouse, I occasionally glimpsed Erica speaking animatedly on her phone. I could only guess she was trying to spin some new narrative. She never approached me directly, perhaps because she knew I wouldn't fall for her games. My ex-husband, who'd been largely absent from my life, caught wind of the drama through our adult daughter, who lived out of state. He called me once to express surprise and dismay. But we'd been divorced for years, and though he offered to help if needed, we both knew his involvement might only complicate matters. So it remained me and Paul standing together against her. The day of the final hearing dawned months after she'd first left the house. By then, the exhaustion was palpable. I had spent countless hours in consultations, thousands of dollars in legal fees, and nights racked with anxiety. But I also felt a sense of resolve. I was determined to end this once and for all. The hearing was a tense affair, each side presenting evidence. Erica's claims about being gifted the jewelry were so poorly substantiated that my lawyer practically dismantled her arguments before the judge's eyes. We submitted photographs of me wearing the items at family functions long before Erica's relationship with Paul, along with witness statements from my sister and a friend who'd known me for decades. Erica squirmed on the stand, her facade cracking under cross-examination. Her lawyer tried to paint me as controlling, claiming I refused to accept Erica into the family, but I had text messages and voicemails showing how welcoming I'd been at the start. Erica's credibility took a serious hit when the video footage of her trying to open my safe was mentioned. While it wasn't directly about the jewelry, it illustrated her deceptive behavior. The judge took note. When the ruling finally came, it was swift. The judge dismissed Erica's claims to the jewelry, stating she had provided no credible evidence of ownership. The notion that she was entitled to any portion of my home's equity was likewise tossed out, as she and Paul had never paid into the mortgage or performed significant improvements. The judge also admonished her for the frivolous nature of her claims, hinting that if I wanted to pursue legal fees from her, I might have grounds. My shoulders sagged in relief, tears slipping down my cheeks. Erica stormed out of the courtroom, heels clacking furiously on the tile floor. She didn't glance my way, and for that, I was grateful. The victory felt surreal. I expected a joyous rush, but what I felt was exhaustion and a sense of bittersweet closure. My lawyer patted my back, congratulating me. Paul gave me a trembling hug, whispering, "I'm so sorry, Mom." Over and over, I just closed my eyes, letting the tension dissolve from my body. On the drive home, it hit me that I'd effectively banished Erica from my life. The note I'd left her, my ultimatum, and the subsequent legal fight had sealed her fate. But at what cost? My family had been torn apart. My son was now facing a divorce, and our home, though physically intact, felt haunted by betrayal. That evening, as Paul and I sat quietly in the living room, the house felt almost too quiet. We were free from her presence, but the ghost of her deceit lingered. Eventually, I got up and brought in a bottle of wine, pouring us each a glass. We sipped in silence, the unspoken acknowledgement that we'd survived a war, albeit with emotional scars. When I finally stood to turn in for the night, Paul caught my hand. "Mom, I thank you for standing up for yourself. And for me. I know this wasn't easy." I managed a tired smile. "We did what we had to do. She took more than just the jewelry, but we can rebuild. We'll be okay." He squeezed my hand, eyes glassy with tears he refused to shed. "I'm so ashamed that I didn't see who she really was. I love you, and I promise I'll make it up to you somehow." My throat tightened. "Oh, sweetheart, just take care of yourself. That's all I want." He nodded, releasing my hand. And that was that. We retreated to our respective rooms, the air still tinged with sorrow, but also laced with the faint hint of hope. A few days later, I decided it was time to retrieve the safe from the storage facility. The hearing was over, the claims dismissed, and I wanted to restore some normalcy. Paul offered to help with the process, and together we arranged for movers to bring it back home. We set it in a different spot, though, choosing the basement this time instead of the study. It felt symbolic, a fresh start for me, the safe and everything it represented. My memories, my inheritance, my security. As we bolted it down to the basement floor, I ran my fingers over the metal, recalling the terror I'd felt that night I caught her trying to break in. Now, I felt a calm protectiveness. This safe was mine, the contents unassailable by her hands. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. The house felt emptier without Erica's presence, but also more peaceful. I returned to old hobbies, gardening, reading, hosting small get-togethers with the neighbors. Paul took time off work to visit my daughter, his sister, out of state. I think he needed distance to heal. One lazy afternoon, I took out my grandmother's bracelet from its protective case in the safe. I held it up to the light, watching it gleam. Tears welled as I thought of the love my grandmother had poured into me, the long talks we'd had over cups of tea, the lessons on resilience and self-respect. I wondered if she'd be proud that I'd stood up for myself. Maybe so. Placing the bracelet on my wrist, I felt a renewed sense of dignity. Betrayal had struck hard, but it hadn't broken me. I thought back to the title of this entire mess. I found my jewelry in her purse, so I left her a note and took the safe. That note had been short and scrawled hastily, a simple message that said, "I know what you did. Leave now or face the consequences." It was more direct than my typical style, but it had served its purpose, setting in motion the unraveling of her plans. I traced the delicate metal of the bracelet, letting the final waves of sadness wash over me. Then, in a small but meaningful gesture, I locked it away again. I would wear it on special occasions, as a testament to my family's legacy, not as an everyday reminder of Erica's betrayal. Some scars, I realized, aren't meant to be showcased constantly. They need time and space to heal. As I walked upstairs from the basement, the echoes of my footsteps on the wooden steps felt like a rhythmic affirmation. I was still here, in my house, standing strong, carrying the memories that mattered, and keeping the toxic ones at bay. The safe was back, but the threat was gone. And though a sense of wistfulness would always remain, for Paul's lost marriage, for the sense of trust that had been shattered, I also felt a small flame of pride. I had come out on the other side, battered perhaps, but not beaten. In the weeks that followed, I called my lawyer to finalize any loose ends from the case. There was talk of me seeking attorney's fees from Erica, but I decided against it, not wanting to prolong any connection to her. Paul quietly filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. He kept the details sparse, not wanting a drawn-out battle. Whether Erica contested it or not, I wasn't sure, but from what Paul told me, she seemed to have moved on, or at least disappeared from his immediate sphere. The gossip from neighbors and acquaintances eventually died down, and soon it was as if she were a bad dream we'd collectively shaken off. I'd sometimes catch Paul staring at old photos, a faraway look in his eyes, mourning the happier illusions of the woman he married. I never pried, understanding that heartbreak doesn't vanish overnight. But we talked more openly than before, forging a renewed closeness. He'd ask my opinion on important decisions or come sit with me on the porch in the evenings, sipping tea and watching the sun dip below the horizon. Our quiet conversations were laced with mutual respect. And little by little, the heaviness lifted. One late afternoon, months after the final hearing, I sat on that porch, reflecting on everything that had happened. The sun painted the sky with strokes of pink and orange, and I sipped my tea, recalling how I used to dread Erica's presence. Now the hush of the house felt comforting, a sanctuary once more. I breathed in the cool evening air, letting gratitude fill my lungs. A wave of emotion surged in me, grief, relief, and a sense of triumph, all intertwined. I set my teacup down and closed my eyes, remembering my grandmother's voice in my mind. Never let anyone take your peace or your self-worth. It felt as though she were sitting beside me, nodding in quiet approval. I promised myself I would never again doubt my instincts so gravely, never again shrink away from a confrontation that needed to happen. I allowed my tears to flow, but they weren't sad tears. They were tears of release, of acceptance. I had lost a daughter-in-law, but I had regained my own power, my self-respect, and in a way, a stronger bond with my son. And for that, I was grateful. When I finally rose from the porch, the last rays of sunlight were vanishing beneath the horizon. I walked inside, flipped on the living room light, and let the warm glow remind me that sometimes, after a storm, what remains is simpler but stronger than before. The house was mine again, and with each breath I felt my resilience deepen. I had faced betrayal and emerged with my spirit intact. And as I closed the front door, I knew that although life might test me again, I would never again be that woman turning a blind eye to things that felt wrong. There was a fierce, quiet strength in me that I would carry forward no matter who tried to steal it.